All right, we are live. All right, I call to order the meeting for the Zoning Board of Appeals for the City of East Hampton on today, Thursday, May 14th. Under administrative activities, we have a few things we need to take care of before we hear the applicant. At this point, we have any public comments or public speak not pertaining to this evening's application. These could be other issues, questions, concerns, anything like that that the public has. Okay. Looking for a motion for the approval of the minutes from the April 9th, 2015 meeting.
So moved.
Okay, second?
I'll second it.
Okay. And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Correspondences or requests for comments from other boards. Jamie, do we have anything?
Yep,
We
there's
do. All right. We have two from the planning board. The first one is for 122, 136 through 148 Pleasant Street, seeking a special permit for their address. Please review the attached application. It was received by the planning board for a special permit for Keystone Enterprises to allow a mixed-use industrial, commercial, residential in an existing mill building. We can look through this. Looks like it's your typical mill building on Pleasant Street. It looks like it's the Soka warehouse.
It was the former Silco, yeah.
Okay. And they're looking to develop it.
Are they able to do the rehab because of the new parking lot?
There are no parking requirements in the mixed-use mill industrial. So, but because of the parking lot and the infrastructure improvements, they've been able to
Attract better tenants?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Because there's parking now. Okay.
Yeah.
and water and fire and
And all
fire
the good stuff.
suppression.
So we're seeing the fruits of the city's labors in doing all that work over there, which is a good thing.
That's true. Plus, there's more work. I saw today that the contract has been granted for the continuation phase 2 of the mill. Okay. To a local contractor, which is always nice to see as well.
Silco's the one, is Silco the one between
Eastworks
Paragon
and
and
Paragon,
Eastworks?
yes. The one that's right next to the road
Yeah.
across from Jerry's Variety there.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll pass that around for everybody to look at. If anyone, we can review that. We've got 30 days for comment, correct?
I believe the response deadline is on the,
May 26th, so we'll have to comment tonight.
Okay.
If we
you
want to
can
comment.
also do this at the end of the
Okay.
hearing.
And then we also have another one for a special site permit application for 1 through 3 Lovefield Street. Attached an application received by the planning board for a special permit for national flooring at 1 through 4 Lovefield Street. This is a protective tenant. This looks like it's where Pete's tractor used to be?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
So,
More recently where Mantis Graphics was.
no, Promark or one of those. It was not Mantis.
It wasn't Mantis, you're right. It was-
Mantis is on Adams Street.
It's the other one,
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, one of the. So we will pass that around as well. People would like to review that. We can come back to those later in the evening, so not to delay the process that we have before us. Do we have any other reports from city offices or any other related business? Okay. Before we begin, we have a couple things we need to discuss. We have 4 permanent members or active members of our board. We have 2 alternative members.
Actually, we're apparently not called alternatives,
Oh.
we're called associates.
Associates, excuse me.
I only bring it up because it was,
An issue?
it was an issue.
Oh. Okay. So, in looking to resolve this in some sort of a timely manner, I would have to believe that we will probably go for multiple meetings potentially. I don't know.
Okay.
But we're trying to set the groundwork now. Do any of the 4 permanent members or active members, I'm not even sure what our titles are.
I think you're just the regular members.
Just members.
Principals.
Have any issue being here for June or July meeting?
I do.
And I know I do as well.
For the June meeting only.
Okay, and I have an issue with the July meeting.
Yeah, I'm okay for June, but not July.
Okay.
The other thing too is everybody gets to miss one and watch or read the minutes.
We can do
And
that too. So, and do we need 4 or do we need 5 for this?
In order for a variance to be approved by the board, it needs 5 affirmative votes
Okay.
of the 5 members on the board.
It needs 5 or 4?
Four affirmative votes. So,
Right, oh, okay,
so
4.
if only 4 members can participate at the vote, then you need a unanimous vote.
Right.
If we have 5 who can sit on the hearing, 1 member could abstain or oppose, and the motion could still pass.
Okay. So, do either of you have conflicts in the future that you foresee
I have in August.
in August?
Yeah.
Well, I hope that we wouldn't go to August.
No, June and July, I don't.
Okay.
What's the date for the June one is what? Oh, wait,
June
hold on,
June 11th is the
Yeah.
next one.
Good.
July,
Yeah.
whatever the second week in July is, that's the one I know I cannot make.
I'm good.
Okay?
I can get it.
So, in an effort to try to keep us fully staffed, do we want to keep you on as,
Well, I would think we could, I mean, is there an issue, with Parsons Street, there was an issue about like, if you started deliberating with a certain number of members, you couldn't then,
Yeah,
but that was like a whole separate statutory overlay.
Yeah, that was the 40B.
So I believe that the associate member has to be participating from the beginning,
Right.
and that you can only have 5 participating members. You can't have 6 members and then drop 1.
So, say Fran can't sit and not participate, but listen to everything tonight and in June. And if we don't vote to July, he couldn't vote if he was sitting here and listening, not participating, but being in attendance.
I would have to look into that.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question? Well, hopefully you can vote tonight, but if not, could there be a special meeting, so another date when everybody is available, if the 11th doesn't work, so we could still take care of this?
well,
in
the June
or-
meeting, I think, is going to be, is not a problem. I mean, because
Oh.
at this point, we only have 1 participant
Okay.
who could not make the June
Okay.
meeting. So, it's the July
Okay.
meeting that we run into the challenge.
Okay.
So, and I'm just trying to be, you know,
Right, so maybe then if
yeah,
it has to be
if
July,
it
it
had
could be
to
another
be, then we
date.
could try to
Okay.
find another time to
Yeah.
meet.
Thank you.
So, we could look at that. So why don't we look at then, do the 2 of you want to decide amongst yourselves who wants in?
I'm happy to leave.
Fran?
I don't care.
Okay.
All right.
I mean,
I'll go home
I-
with my kids to bed.
Thank you for
Thank you for coming in.
coming in.
Oh, my pleasure. Okay, wait. So let me look up the photos.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
It's good to see you all again.
Yes, it is always good to see you, Maggie. All right. Before you leave, Maggie, I need to make an announcement.
Oh, right.
Um,
You should take care of that, yeah.
I am a property abutter. Okay? I have discussed the matter with the mayor and explained that I am a direct property abutter. And in doing so, she asked, I said, should I recuse myself? And she said, if you have no financial gain or financial interest in the matter, then there is ethically probably no reason for me to recuse myself. But I want you to be completely aware of that matter before we proceed, so you are aware. Okay?
Okay.
I mean, I've taken the ethics tests, I've done everything I'm supposed to do to...
I'm on my town ZBA, so I get
Okay,
it.
so you understand,
Yeah.
okay? And, I'm doing this because I care what happens in our community. And whether it's next to me or across town, I care just as much.
And this does go through another layer of approvals.
It goes
afterward
through a
here.
complete another layer of approvals. Okay, so, this is not the final straw and where I would have.
So you could speak up at the next meeting.
I have every right to go to another meeting and say what I want to say as an abutter. But I wanted to let you know before we proceeded. Okay. All right. So.
So I'll go.
Okay.
You all.
I wanted to get that out in the open.
Thank you.
Yeah, particularly early. So. All right.
Have a good night, guys.
All right.
Take care.
So, we will now begin with a public hearing. The first application we have this evening, and our only application this evening, is from Bell Atlantic Mobile of Massachusetts Corporation, doing business as Verizon Wireless, at 99 East River Drive, East Hartford, Connecticut, seeking variances under Section 13.1 of the East Hampton zoning ordinance to Section 7.2 of the East Hampton zoning ordinance for the construction of a cell phone tower outside of the Wireless Communication Service Overlay Zoning District. The property is located at 51 Brook Street and is zoned R40. You may present your case. Please state your name and who you are, and we will get started.
Thank you. My name is Ellen Fryman. I'm an attorney with Schatz, Schwartz, and Fenton in Springfield, and I represent Verizon Wireless. And yes, we're here specifically to request 3 variances. We've been looking for a site in East Hampton for a while. There's an area where we need additional coverage and capacity, which we will demonstrate. And so we did, and we also are concerned about the visual impact. So we were happy to find a site that we believe has very minimal visual impact in the community, which is one of the concerns of your zoning ordinance. However, while we could meet many of the requirements, and there are many of the requirements for the siting of a tower in the zoning ordinance, there's 3 that we could not satisfy. One is there is an overlay district, and I'm just going to do a purview and then we'll go back and talk about them. One of them is that you have an overlay district and there's specific parcels that are in the overlay district, and you'll see that in this area of town that we're locating a tower, there are no sites. So that we're asking for a variance to allow to locate in a parcel that's outside the overlay district. Another requirement is that the tower not be located in an area 150 feet from a change in grade that's 5% or greater. And based on the constraints on this site, we will be 61 feet from a 5% slope or greater, which will show you and believe that we overcome any of the issues related to that. And then the last one is there's a requirement that no tower be closer than 1 mile apart. And we're close, but we will be within a mile of a couple of other towers. When this bylaw or ordinance was drafted, it's many years now, things have changed in the industry, and so some of these requirements I think are no longer relevant to what's happening. When these were drafted in before 2000, there were not as many phones in use, and you just made calls with your phones. And now with all of the various uses that you have for your phone, and with your camera and with your taking pictures and the data transmission, now with watches and iPads, the capacity is tremendous. And so and then also the technology has changed, so we don't have to go on top of mountains. We don't have to cover great swaths of land. We're now concentrating on areas where there's high usage, and what we call the traffic is great, and we need to satisfy so you don't drop calls and you don't lose data, and that everybody expects the data transmission to be fast, so we need to meet all those needs. So what I'd like to do is explain why we need going back into detail in each of these requests, and give you information about the tower itself, the location, and then I explained in the application how we satisfy the various requirements, because for a variance, you have to meet all the different requirements. And I did explain in writing how we meet the different elements, and to the extent that you want me to review those, I can do that. One thing I'd also like to point out is that not only are we governed by the local zoning regulations, but we are governed by the Telecommunications Act. And you may be familiar with that, but it does give the town, city in this case, some authorities that you don't have just under 40A, which is to grant variances because you can't preclude a any carrier from having service in the town. So if one of these regulations would otherwise preclude us from having service, the Telecommunications Act kicks in and gives you the authority. So like a use variance, where you wouldn't normally be able to give a use variance, I cited some cases that support that the Telecommunications Act does allow you to grant a use variance. In fact, I met with the town earlier before we went this route and said, should we do a zone change to ask to have that parcel in the within the overlay district, or do a use variance, and came back and was told that to go the use variance route. So just to make you aware that you have the authority in this unique circumstance. So I'd like to introduce some members of our Verizon Wireless team, and we'll give you a little bit more detail. First is Doug Roberts from Hudson Design. He's the architect, and he designed the site, and I'd like him to go over the plans for the site. Doug? Yep.
Perhaps.
Yeah, probably the doorway's gonna be best.
Easier.
Yeah.
Thank you. Again, my name is Doug Roberts. I'm an architect at Hudson Design Group. And I'll go over the parameters of the site and its location. This is the parcel itself. It's a little over 19 acres. There's a right-of-way for the electric power lines through this area right here. The ball fields are to the north. There's a residence here, and Brook Street itself runs down here, and that's sort of the cul-de-sac. So basically, our plan is to come off the end of Brook Street with a utility easement and access easement around to a new site located in this location. It's about 120, 202 feet from the north property line. It's 133 feet from the west, which is 110% of the tower height per your regulations. And as Ellen pointed out, we do have a slope that drops off 61 feet to the edge that drops off, and it's about a 35% slope. There's really no reason to, the slope is not a structural issue for the tower or anything like that. It's nothing that I would see as being a detriment, being that close to that slope. I was thinking that maybe at one time, part of the regulations were to keep towers from the edges of broad cliffs that, everyone could see then. They'd have to be at flatter areas or lower. That's the only reason why I could foresee that regulation is in place. Yeah. So we were asking for a variance on that. And the site itself is this is 120-foot monopole with antennas located at 115 feet. We have a 11 6 by 26-foot shelter, which will have air conditioning in it, as well as a backup generator, and a monopole and a foundation. It's pretty straightforward. We'll bring in utilities underground in telephone to a meter center, and there's ample room for co-locators if in the future that someone would be interested in going on that. It's kind of the gist of the project. What we will do is, prior to applying for a building permit, we'll do geotechnical investigation to determine the proper foundation, whether it's a caisson or, we might have to rock socket it or pad and pier. We don't know what that would be, but
It's pretty sandy back there.
yeah, it is in this valley. So we're pretty comfortable with that. But that's our project. We kind of kept the, I'll jump back to this sheet. We offset the tower to the back so that we would, again, be as far away from this edge as possible, but we couldn't really move it to get that slope out of our variance. So as we head north, we kind of start dropping in grade, and also we wanted to have maintain that buffer to the ball fields with that tree cover. have any questions, we'd be happy to.
So this is at a lower elevation than the ball fields?
It's about the same elevation. The grade from here to here is roughly the same. It doesn't drop at
There's a
all.
low
It's
spot
pretty
about
much a
halfway
flat
down.
road. Yeah, what happens is this is sort of a plateau, and then it sort of drops down to a wetland course down here, and eventually, it's dropping down to the brook. So, we're at sort of a plateau where it drops down to the wetlands and the brook itself.
One thing I want to mention is that when we submitted the plans originally, we had the tower height at 105 feet. And after we did a balloon float, and it turns out the trees were actually taller than we anticipated, and we need to be above the tree line to send the signal. So we've increased the height to 125, and we need to, so we meet the setback. 120, I'm sorry. I said that, I knew that was. We still meet the setback requirements, but I did prepare revised plans just showing the change in the tower height, which doesn't affect anything else, so.
Do you happen to take a picture of the balloon float?
We do have that, and I'm gonna show that. In fact, I can do that next, and then we can talk about the coverage, so.
The tower height
and
was
David,
what?
here's the,
The tower's
Tower.
120,
120, okay.
and the antennas are at 115.
115?
Yes.
yeah. Just so you know, we, as part of the special permit application, we'll do a balloon float for the public and advertise it for the public to see. And so that's one of the concerns that they have when they're issuing a special permit.
Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. I'll just jump in real quick, let you know what you're looking at. My name is Mike Libertine. I'm with All Points Technology. We're a consultant that works with Verizon, basically on the environmental issues, including visibility. What we did was, we do go out and float a balloon, and in this case, the tower height was originally proposed at 105 feet. We put a red weather balloon, about 4 feet in diameter, filled with helium, tethered to 105 foot of string. As soon as we got out of the site area and started driving around, we realized we can't see this thing. So we had been working with the radio frequency engineer, Jay Latour, who'll speak in a little bit, and we did have some concerns about getting above that initial tree height that's in the immediate area. So what we decided to do was we actually put a second balloon up, a white balloon at 150 feet. So we would have a good idea, or as a marker, where we should be looking. We also use GPS technology, that type of thing, but in this case, what you can see from the photos is, in most cases, even at 150 feet, it was very, very hard to find locations where we could even see the white balloon. I will point to a few general areas where at 120 it will be visible, and there are photo simulations that accompany the shots that either are indicating year-round or seasonal visibility. That's been scaled to the 120-foot height. At the property itself, it's very heavily wooded. As you walk northward into the park, that initial ball field really does not have much visibility at all. I do have some photos taken from several aspects where a lot of non-visible shots, and there are a few spots where at 120 feet it just gets to the top of the trees. A little bit further to the north, I'm going to call it the second ball field away from the property. There's one spot there, basically around the concession stand of that initial field. You'll be able to see, you could see the 150-foot balloon, but it's very difficult to see even at 120 feet. As you move southward on Brook Street and get off the cul-de-sac, at the immediate cul-de-sac, the aspect is such that you, even at 120 feet, you really can't see it. As you start moving away from the site, and if you were looking northward coming in, there are 4 or 5 residences along that stretch where you'll see it through the trees, or just above the tree line itself. As you move primarily to the south, there's really not a lot of visibility at all. One of the reasons is because it's just such a broad plain out there. There's really not a lot of topographic break, and the trees are pretty significantly tall, as well as very mature and very dense. So where you do see it as you're moving back, coming back towards 141, right at the intersection at the base of the hill, There is one spot looking over the fields where you will see it just slightly above the tree. And apologies, let me get a copy. I can actually point you to that photo. And of course, the other areas that you would see is if you were up on Mount Tom driving the roads and looking at some of the outlooks. You'll look back down the valley, you'll see it buried in the valley there. But just to give you an idea of that one shot that I thought was worth pointing out. Yeah, several shots, 25 through 30 are from Nonotuck Park itself, so you can kind of get an idea of where it would be visible and where it would not. It's Hendrick Street was actually the, if you look at photo number 32, that's the most prominent location in terms of a viewpoint. In photo 32 of the existing conditions, you'll see the balloons at 150 and at 105, just above the tree line. The next page actually has a scaled facility dropped in that location at 120 feet.
How tall are the utility poles along that power line, just for comparison?
Oh, the actual utility structures, they're steel, right? Or they wood? They are steel. Normally, those are somewhere between anywhere from 70 to 90 feet, but I don't, they've done so many upgrades in the last 5-10 years. I'm not sure if those are some newer structures that, tend to go a little taller. I could get that height for you, though.
I was just thinking for comparison.
Yeah.
Those are visible.
Yeah, well, you've also got all the clear cutting around it, and it's a corridor, so yeah, you're absolutely right.
No, they got rid of the archers. They put in
Yeah, some of those may be a little taller, maybe in the 100-foot range.
Yeah. Which is nice.
And I think I've got a pretty good shot looking down the corridor that had a straight aspect towards our site where we couldn't see the balloons, you won't see our tower, but certainly, yeah, photo 22 right along Brook Street actually is a shot where seasonally you'd see our tower. So actually you get a pretty good idea. These towers in this right of way, they're probably taller. They may be more in like the 110-foot range. Because those are relatively newer poles.
There were single poles just put in maybe
Right,
15 years.
yeah. And as Ellen said, we'll be, glad to do a balloon float the day of the public hearing so folks can get an understanding. Hopefully we'll have good weather. We had a great day, wind-wise, to be able to do this a couple of weeks back. If you have any questions, I'm here, so feel free.
Next I'm going to have Jay Latoya, radio frequency engineer, talk about the coverage. And one of the variances that we mentioned was the fact that we are outside the overlay district, and I just wanted to show you your overlay map. So this is a map of the town, and if you can see the cross parcels, or the parcels where we're permitted to, which is part of the overlay district where you're permitted to put towers, and this is where we're proposing. And as you can see in this portion of the town, there are no sites. So again, when this was adopted, it couldn't be foreseen where coverage was needed, and what the situation is now with the need for coverage for cellular use. So Jay will talk about the coverage needs in this area and answer any questions regarding the radio frequency.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jay Latory. I'm a radio frequency design engineer for Verizon Wireless. And as Attorney Brandon mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's driving our need for a facility in this southern portion of East Hampton. And I'll talk a little bit about our need for a variance for the reason why our facility is within a mile of another cell tower. And we'll go over some coverage propagations to give you an idea of where our current reliable coverage is, and should we be able to build this facility, how it will enhance coverage in East Hampton. I'm going to start by just putting up these maps, and I think I can tell two stories here. First, to give you an idea of where our facilities are, where we provide Verizon wireless services today. What you see here, right here in the middle of the map, is the proposed facility we're talking about tonight, which we call East Hampton 2. And then there really are only two other facilities in the area that provide coverage in East Hampton. One, we have a site not too far from where we are, our East Hampton site, which is the smokestack. And the only other facility in the area that serves in East Hampton is actually over the border on College Highway in Southampton, and that's about 150-foot monopole that you may have seen on Route 10. Many of the other carriers are co-located on that as well. For your reference, this is Route 141, and this blue line right here is the border in between East Hampton and Holyoke, and 91 runs this way along Route 5. In regards to our need for a variance for the reason of desiring to site a tower within a mile of another tower, we did some analysis with East Hampton's legal counsel to get an understanding of that requirement, and because we had a question of whether or not the vision of that portion of the zoning regulations envisioned a tower within a mile of another East Hampton tower, or any tower in the area. And their interpretation, which we've presented tonight, is that it's any tower. The two facilities that Verizon Wireless are on today are both greater than 1 mile away from our proposed facility. The only facilities that presents a challenge for us are the approximately 5 towers that straddle essentially East Hampton and Holyoke on top of Mount Tom. They are included, and I believe it's a tab 7 of the application for your reference. And they're owned by various organizations. One is owned by the FAA, 2 are owned by WWLP. The other 2 facilities, one is a what appeared to be maybe like a legacy wireless carrier from the 90s. It's a name, I was able to look it up from the FCC page, but I'm not familiar with them as a provider of service today. And there's additional facility as well. So those are existing structures today, and they're all approximately 0.9 miles away, if you looked at it the way the bird flies, to our proposed facility. So those are what triggers the variance. Now, the reason we're proposing a site down in East Hampton proper versus co-locating on one of those facilities is focused on the sheer difference in elevation of those 2 sites. As Attorney Fryman mentioned, in a world of wireless 20 years ago, the idea was to spread as much coverage as far as you could, because there wasn't a lot of demand, and so you try to find a site on top of a mountain and hang your antennas up there as tall as you could get them and provide coverage as far as you could, because the race was on to say who could provide the most coverage. The world has changed in the last 20 years, and now it's expected that most of the major providers have service almost everywhere. That's become kind of a common thing. And now the question is, who can provide coverage reliably? Who can provide coverage both outdoor and indoors? Who can provide the new generation of voice and data and have it be at faster speeds as we get used to seeing pictures of grandkids on our iPads, or surfing the web and checking email and things like that. And so with that, it's necessitated putting new transmitter locations in areas where we see perceived demand, where we see weak signal strength, and where we can control the coverage so that we're not creating a lot of unnecessary overlap with other existing facilities. In this world of design, when we have significant overlap between other sites, it creates a challenge for our technologies to really provide dedicated service to someone trying to use their handset and get a great throughput or reliable call. So quite frankly, a co-location on those facilities on top of Mount Tom, being 1,000 feet tall, it would be impossible to co-locate it and not have the wireless signal not only spread all over East Hampton, not only spread in areas where these other facilities are, but going further even into other towns, And what the result of that would be is, while users in the area that maybe not enjoy any service today may have some level of service signal strength to access our Verizon Wireless services, our services would get so taxed because of our sheer inability to control that RF to a small area that they would not be in any way, in line with what our customers expect in terms of our quality of service. You'd have people, potentially 5 or 10 miles away accessing the same cell site for their data and voice services. And you'd have so many, because this is a well-populated area, that our service throughputs would degrade, and consequently our ability to provide reliable service would degrade. So that's really at the crux of why this variance is necessary, because quite frankly, a co-location at that height, and most of those towers are not only well over 1,000 feet in elevation, but then there are 150 or 160 foot towers, would present a significant design challenge for us, one we wouldn't be able to overcome. Sure.
If I could just ask a question there.
Yes.
In my, I don't even want to, how to describe what little I know, but you're basically, are you sending out a radius wave, or could you put it on top of the mountain and direct it towards the valley? Because my understanding, what you're saying is that with the 1,000-foot elevation difference,
Right.
and so you put out your waves, your radio frequency. Now all of a sudden you're into West Hampton as opposed to
Sure.
the East Hampton Valley that you're trying to hit.
Understood. I think I understand the crux of your question. We have moved away from what we would call like a traditional omnidirectional type design, where you stick up one antenna that provides RF all in the same direction and will reach anywhere where there's sufficient line of sight to. So we have moved away from that. We now deploy what we call sectorized sites, and you'll see here each of these sites has 3 sectors, 3 sets of antennas that are oriented in a particular azimuth. The antennas have a different, depending on their model and style, may have a different vertical beam width or horizontal beam width. And they can be, tilted down or up and things like that. So all of that is true. Hypothetically, if you had, this incredible antenna that could somehow be, let's say, at some point 1,200 feet in the air, and so perfectly point into the valley that it wouldn't overshoot, you might be able to accomplish that. But with today's products and services, and my experience in doing design all over Western Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Vermont, the challenges are great. And at certain signal levels, it's essentially impossible to drive it so far into the ground where it's not going to what we would call bleed over into other sites or bleed over into other towns. You really need to utilize to the best of your ability the terrain, as well as what we call clutter, trees, things like that, to try and contain your signal strength, as well as smart siting of your towers, putting them in locations where you don't have great service, and you can put them without creating a lot of overlap. My experience is with the sites that we have from years ago that are on top of mountains, that they all get out very far. It's a challenge for us, and we are even in other locations across Western Mass and across the country looking at ways and in a future world getting off those towers and building around those areas to provide more dedicated service for our customers. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'll now talk a little bit about the coverage. Again, I've talked a little bit about the facilities here, and what I'm talking about now is what we call our 700 megahertz 4G LTE coverage. 4G service, you may have heard, Verizon Wireless provides for our data services, as well as our advanced calling voice high definition services. everything in here that is in like a pink salmon color is at a level of 120 reverse link operational path loss. It's measured in decibels. And what it means is this is Verizon Wireless's standard for where we call, we would say we have reliable coverage. And what reliable coverage more or less means is the customer should have a reasonable expectation that when they're in any of these areas of pink, salmon, whatever you want to call it, that they should be able to use their phones, whether they're outside, whether they're in the car, whether they're maybe on the first or second floor of their house. Not maybe necessarily if they're, in a basement or something like that, like in this area. But they should have that reasonable expectation that they pay for when they get their service. So all the areas in white, and again, for your reference, this blue represents the town borders here, would be areas where we really don't have reliable service. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you're outside, you might not have a faint signal, something that you can use outside, but more likely or not in these areas, if you're in your car or if you're in your first floor of your house or in dense woods or things like that, more likely than not, you're not going to have reliable service. And, part of tonight is talking about how this proposed facility will enhance that. So, again, consistent with what we saw with the overlay district of not really having anything in the south part of East Hampton, Verizon Wireless has a gap and a perceived need to enhance that based on, what we've determined to be, areas where we have lost calls, ineffective attempts, and also have demand. There's neighborhoods and things of that nature. If I go to the next page here, and forgive me, the color is a little bit different, but I think that's just a printing thing. Same concept, same 3 facilities, this time with the East Hampton 2 proposed facility turned on. And you see here, and I can hold this up a little bit just for your benefit, you can see that once this facility is activated, the strong majority of the rest of East Hampton or southern East Hampton is now provided with reliable Verizon Wireless 700 megahertz service. I'm going to take you through 2 more additional slides. Same concept, same 3 facilities. Everything in green is our 2100 megahertz 4G LTE coverage. It's higher frequency, different bandwidth, and with that, at a higher frequency, your signal attenuates or reduces in power a little bit faster. And so you'll see here in this example, we actually only have this deployed at the Smokestack facility, East Hampton, and it does not provide service as far as the 700 megahertz layer. This is an underlayer for Verizon Wireless where we deploy this in areas where we see high demand for our services and there's a perceived need for additional capacity to make sure that we continue to provide service, not only in terms of just being able to get on your phone, but also at speeds that you're, expecting when you are using our phones. So we do have this investment already on air at the East Hampton facility, and with the activation of the proposed facility, you'll see here again with the 2 of them working together, you have a more significant portion of the town with this service, which you may have heard in commercials is branded as what they call XLTE, and it just means higher speed service, but not covering as far. Okay.
Now, it appears to me that there is still a portion of East Hampton that would not be covered by this location.
Yes, you have that correct. And again, just to clarify, in terms of what we would call reliable service, you have that accurate. So there are still going to be some areas, let's say this 2100 megahertz layer, which is again, it's an underlay. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to get on your phone. It just means you might not have access to the highest speed service. You do have some areas here towards the very end of East Hampton where you wouldn't have service. Additionally, Verizon takes a tiered approach to investing in this service and towers. So for example, here, if I pull this first map back up, you can see that Southampton site, which is providing service into this area of town, the western portion here. There is 4G LTE here, it's just not that this higher speed service is yet available there. And we do a couple of things. We're constantly trending our service and performance on our towers, and as the need arises for additional capacity, we're going back to our towers and upgrading them, no different than we did at East Hampton. So there may be a time in the future where we determine that the demand on this facility requires an investment in there too, in which case we would go to that town and request a building permit and add those services oriented in the way they are today to provide service. Today, these maps are meant to show basically the service using a propagation tool to the best of our modeling techniques to show what's the real situation today.
I guess I don't understand the technicalities of this.
Sure.
I have Verizon service, but I only have a 3G phone, and I live a half a mile as the crow flies from the proposed tower site.
Okay.
The street I live on intersects one of your pictures here. And I don't spend a lot of time on my cell phone at home, watching videos. I use it for the phone. I use it for data occasionally.
Okay.
I only get 1 or 2 bars, but I can always get a call. I never have dropped calls. I used to have another carrier. I switched to Verizon, which I'm much more happy with where I live.
Thank you.
How would this impact my service and the difference between the 2 levels of service? Would I notice it at all? Or only if I was a 17-year-old who lived on my telephone, which most 17-year-olds do? Is that what...
I'll just comment and then Jay can fit. But one thing is we're anticipating what is trending. So today might be good, but in a month or 6 months or 8 months, or by the time we get this tower up, which is going to be a while, you're going to see it get worse.
Okay.
And
Yep, no, that's exactly right. Could you give me a rough idea? Are you somewhere in this area or?
Off of Holyoke Street, down near the bottom of the mountain.
Okay,
Yeah.
so somewhere in here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So,
Off of Plaza, which is one of your pictures here.
okay. So without knowing, exactly where, if you're somewhere in this area where you're within now a half mile of a facility, approximately, and you've got one of our sets of antennas, pointed roughly at your house, I would expect a, enhancement in the reliability of your service. Now, to your point, if you're someone who uses a phone more casually, not for,
I don't watch videos on my
right,
phone.
right.
I have a television for that.
Where I would say you might see an enhancement is, let's say maybe, whereas today if you're taking a phone call and you walk down, into your basement and you drop a call, you might see an enhancement there because now instead of connecting to, a facility that's maybe 2.5 or 3 miles away, you're connecting to something much closer. The amount of loss in the signal from that facility to your home is reduced, and the chances of reliable service are going to improve. To your other point, you hit it exactly on the head. Part of what is driving this is as we enhance our services and offer things like NFL Mobile, and people are checking Facebook every 5 minutes and streaming videos on YouTube. The demand on our data services and our growing voice services is increasing, and our ability to continue to provide those services at a level of service that our customers expect requires new locations. So for the 17-year-old that's constantly posting pictures on Instagram, they're going to benefit greatly from this facility.
I was trying to figure out why.
Yeah.
And so it is the 17-year-old
Sure.
and the...
Yeah.
Not just 17-year-old.
They're the user.
Right.
They're the user.
Right. But I would also comment that whether you use it a little bit or you use it a lot, as more and more customers divest their home phones and begin to rely permanently on cellular phones for not only talking to family and friends, but maybe an emergency phone call someday. It's important that we as a carrier provide a high level of reliable service to everyone. That's our goal at the end of the day, because we know that the trend shows that more people own wireless handsets than they own phones in their home anymore. And so with that comes our responsibility to make sure when you pick up your phone, it's going to work.
And one of the things that we'll say when we are before the planning board is that we always offer free space for the town, or to the city, for any emergency equipment, any public safety equipment that they need. So that would be, a benefit to the town, to the city, and if they were, to need that and want to upgrade their equipment. And again, public safety is another important element of us providing reliable service.
Any questions I can answer?
I have quite a few.
Very good.
In reading this, there was a an explanation that this location was based off the triangulation or using other towers to complete the grid or whatever
Sure.
the terminology is. What are the distances from the proposed tower to the existing 2 towers that are in your network?
I don't know those exact numbers off the top of my head. I could certainly submit that to you for your benefit. I believe approximately both are in the range of 2.5 to 3 miles in each case.
And you've shown the 2 towers, one that is within city limits and one that is just over the border into Southampton.
Correct.
And the proposed tower, can you take and can you provide us with a map that there expands out 10 miles to show the configuration? Because is there one that's further in Southampton or in Holyoke up on Rock Hill that is also
Sure.
part of that grid?
Sure, I
for lack of
understand
a
your
better
question. So first, to answer your question specifically, yes, we can do that for you. That's no problem. And then to comment on that, I'll say a couple of things. In regards to the surrounding towns, there is one other facility in Southampton. It's also on 10. It's a little bit north of Barnes Air Force Base, so it's a couple miles back down, heading towards Westfield. I'd have to verify through the map, but my personal experience in driving the network and testing it is that site doesn't provide any meaningful coverage back into East Hampton. In terms of Holyoke, there are no facilities along I-91 that provide any sort of service. Most of our facilities in Holyoke are what I'll call like the core downtown area. We also have a facility on 202 heading from Holyoke to Westfield that provides service. We do have other facilities because the Holyoke border is relatively short from Holyoke to East Hampton. We do have facilities on this side of the highway in South Hadley that do provide coverage along I-91. I didn't include them because I thought for the benefit here we would focus on some of the more zoomed in details of this. But
I understand that.
Essentially, and you can kind of get a feel for it here because of this facility. The challenge is the mountain range, essentially. So you have facilities here where perhaps if there were no mountains, you would get coverage that would go clear across the river. You don't because of this range. And the similar story, and we can show that in a follow-up map, tells the same thing. The facilities on this side in South Hadley, Chicopee, etc., while they do provide coverage this way, they stop essentially at the town line. Because they just can't.
The mountain does amazing
things. They can't
things.
overcome that height.
Sure. The map that you've presented there of existing coverage, is the shaded area only what is being accessed by the 2 towers that are existing? In other words, you went out with your meter, or you somehow can collect data
Right.
that reflects reception that you're getting from those specific towers.
Correct. So
And so my, in simple terms, is there one that's, off the map on the lower left quadrant
Right.
that is providing service, but you have not shown that coverage?
I understand your question, so I'll answer that in a couple ways. First, let me talk a little bit how these maps are made. They are propagation maps. So what that means is they take in a number of technical engineering parameters to create a prediction of what the service is in this area. So in the case of these two facilities, and you had it right, that this is just focused on the two closest facilities here, and what we call that in wireless is the first tier neighbors, the neighbors directly to those sites. It takes into account the height of those facilities, the ground level elevation, line losses coming from the radios at the bottom of those facilities to the antennas on top, the orientations of the antennas, the gain of them, their azimuths, we mentioned the sectorization, and then it also takes into account what we talked about before, the clutter of the area. We have third-party teams that go out and more or less define for geographical areas the amount of trees or buildings or hills, etc., that wireless signals have to overcome. It's not a perfect, map. It is a prediction, but it's one that takes into account, very sound engineering practice and all of our up-to-date engineering variables to provide a reasonable, estimate of coverage. Now, the second thing that we do internal to Verizon, and you might remember this from back in the day, the guy who used to say, "Can you hear me now?" Good. The second thing we do is we drive test. We go out with handsets as well as scanners, and we drive these roads multiple times throughout the year, as well as there's a lot of third-party companies that will drive these roads to verify our signal levels of service. And those two things together really help us identify the locations where we need to enhance our service. So we have that data as well. So I take those two things, what this tool is showing me for coverage, and my, not only my drive testing data of, actual real-world coverage, but our third-party results and my own experiences from living in Western Massachusetts. I live in Springfield, so I'm in these areas, and I put that all together in a map that I would present to a municipality that shows a very reasonable expectation in terms of what our service is good today and where our service needs to be enhanced.
Okay.
So basically, if I lived on Hendrick Street, I couldn't have a Verizon cell phone today because I don't have any service based on.
Again, I want to make sure I clarify. It doesn't mean that you don't necessarily have no service. It just means that your service is no longer what Verizon Wireless would call reliable. In these areas of white, for example, I'll use an example here. Let's say you happen to have a home right in this area here, right on the edge of this border. Is it reasonable to say that, maybe half the time or so you get a reliable, call through, and the other half of the time, it might not work? You might be in an area where, let's say, there's a lot of trees there, and in the winter, when there's no leaves on the trees, your service is better, and in the summer, when the leaves come back, or just past week and a half, it reduces, and it's kind of iffy. Yeah, that could happen. Let's take a look maybe at some of these areas where now you're starting to talk about being like a half mile or maybe even more from where we say our cutoff is for reliable service. More likely than not, we talked about being inside, we talked about being in the car. It's at a level of service that we don't deem acceptable for our customers.
So you might still have service, it's just not good service.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And part of our responsibility to our customers is not only to say, oh, you can get on it, but to say you can get on it and it's going to work. And whether it's just to call someone in your family or it's, to stream a 2-hour movie, it's our job to make sure whatever our customer wants to make their experience, that they have the signal and the capacity to do that.
Right, and again, based on the forecast of usage, it's gonna continue to deteriorate and get worse as we go in the future.
As more and
So-
more people use it. What, how did you come up with this location?
I'll speak to that in a multifaceted process. I'll try to give you the whole story.
Okay, because I look at that map, and being the layperson that I am,
Right.
I would say I want to put it in the middle of that big white area
Sure.
because then I can cover more people.
Sure.
But that's you're the you're the expert.
No, it's a great question. So every site starts in as what we would call a search area, which is we do some analysis. We've determined that we have a need in this area. We put, quite frankly, kind of like a dot in the map where if we can get somewhere in this area, we think we can provide service. Okay, that goes out to our real estate consultant. Our real estate consultant, someone's going to drive out to East Hampton. And they're going to look at the municipal maps and start to look at parcels. And they're going to take a couple of different things into consideration. They are taking into consideration my needs, which are I need to provide service in a rough geographical area, and that radius, is typically, nowadays about on average been a half-mile radius of my pinpoint or so. And they're going to look at a number of things. And I'll list them off in no particular order. Number one, is the parcel big enough to site a tower? Number two, is the parcel, to the best extent possible, able to have a tower sited, free of being in any, significant rivers or things of that nature? Is the parcel, sited in, a historical district or, at a national, federal, state or local level? Does the parcel lend itself to any sort of advantages, such as this parcel where we have a lot of tree cover, where we can site the tower in a way that a huge majority of it is going to be unexposed to the general public? And there are other things as well. And then ultimately, though, we have to have a willing landlord who's going to go into an agreement with Verizon Wireless, on a ground lease so that we can build a structure. So everyone on the team is familiar with all those variables, and from there, our our real estate specialist comes back with a couple candidates. We go out, and as we did with this facility, we go out and look at different areas, potential locations, and we look at a number of things depending on where they are, the ones I've mentioned. And then for me, I kind of have to take a look at things. So, at a particular parcel, where am I in relation to my other sites, and how is that going to affect my overall azimuths? Am I going to site my tower in a place where I'm really going to be hindered by the surrounding topology in that maybe some of my sectors, my sets of antennas are oriented to something that doesn't make sense? Could I, knowing that what the needs of the company are and, the need for our services are, do we think this proposal at a high level is something that is achievable, that makes sense, is can be permitted, can be leased, and also, is, consistent balance between weighing the needs of the residents in terms of visibility and safety and all those other factors, as well as providing service. And we take all of that into consideration when we come up with a facility. It's a detailed process. As you see here tonight, we have a number of different experts that help us in the siting of a tower, and all of that was taken into consideration between my testimony and the other ones here to come with the proposal that we have today. Now I think I understand the crux of your question. You might say, oh, it's up here, maybe you should have it down here. Well, again, assuming all those things are the same and you're able to find a lease, this, that, I mean, it's somewhat of a theoretical. At the end of the day, one of the things couple of the things that made this facility great. Number one, it's relatively covered because of the natural tree line. Number two, it's not so far from the other facilities that it would struggle to overlap just enough so that you could have seamless handoffs. Number three, it's in an area where we've already determined that we have unreliable service. And number four, it allows us for some very specific orientations. We have a sector going back north, which is going to help relieve some of these sectors here that are really overloaded by the fact that in this center here is one of the densest populated areas of town where all your businesses are. Number two, it's going to help us fix a gap that we have with some unreliability on Route 141, which is a pretty popular road for us to cover. And number three, we have a lot of residences and homes down in this area where we have really poor service. And we're going to be able to provide enhanced service with line of sight to those customers in those homes. And as you can see, there's a lot of different trade-offs and analysis that goes into it. It's in an ideal world, we'd say, oh, we could just put it exactly right there. But that's not realistic. And Verizon Wireless is here because we want to be a partner with the town. We want to bring service to the town and do it in a way that is responsible. And we feel this is a really responsible package.
We started this well over a year ago. I think I was in the town here, over a year, and it's a long, lengthy process. We have federal permits to go through. We have Conservation Commission. We have all, so it's we're happy when we get such a what we think is a great site.
And what other location, were there other locations in the city that were looked at?
There were two other locations that we looked at. I don't. I have that information on file. And Ellen, we can share that information. Two other facilities. From my recollection, I know one of the parcels, and again, forgive me, as we don't have a lease with them, I don't have them, off the top of my head, but I know one facility was in the wide open. It was like an open field, and we thought that wouldn't be appropriate, just due to the fact that it would be clear as day for all the neighbors to see. And we thought not only was that maybe not consistent with what the mission of the ZBA has for the town, but just, is an unnecessary eyesore, especially when there's other alternatives. I'd have to, the other facility, I'd have to dig back into things like that. But yeah, I mean, part of the process.
Curious, yeah.
Part of the process definitely is looking at multiple parcels, evaluating them, all the conditions, that we talked about, and then at the end of the day, kind of waiting to say, which one can we get done for our customers?
Okay.
And that's how we came to this one.
And I mean, I'll ask the question. I mean, you are 220 feet, something like that, from city property. Was that looked at?
What is the specific parcel?
The park, Montauk Park.
Okay, so Ellen, maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, I believe that is Chapter 97 land, which is not, we wouldn't be able to go on open property in the city. And when I did come in, again, before I did anything, the first thing I did was come in here and say, this is what we're looking at, do you see any objection to this? Because we know that it's out, we're going to need these variances, and so.
200 feet to the west, it could have been on my property. I mean.
Yeah. I do have a map showing the distances from residences, and which is pretty significant. The closest is like 561 feet away from homes, and I can leave that with you too. So, which is something that we make sure we're concerned about. Multiple copy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I got a couple questions. You're going to get me into that question. And you already reviewed the flyover coverage area. If by putting it on top of the mountain, basically you would just skip the whole valley.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And you know, from reading everything, basically you're saying if the tower was at 200, you know, feet above mean sea level, the service would work if it was on the mountain. If the mountain wasn't there and it was flat, then the tower on the mountain would work. Am I kind of
Sure,
safe in that?
Yeah, I
if
can,
we lived
sure.
in
If it was a hill instead of a mountain, and you know, then let's just say those facilities are somewhere in here. Yeah, I might be able to take a sector of service and point it this way back towards the town. Because our sectors are traditionally about oriented 120 degrees apart. If I'm in this area, like in the far extremity of East Hampton, you know, I might be able to provide the coverage. The signal would be there. But what the town would lose is the fact that, just doing it off the top of my head, you know, at most I'm providing one sector of capacity back into the town. Whereas when the proposed facility, which is, you know, well within the limits of the town, is providing all three sectors of service, you know, overwhelmingly focused on within the town. You know, I mean, this Southampton site is a perfect example. It's in Southampton, but one of its transmitter, you know, sectors clearly is meant to provide service in East Hampton.
right.
So that's, you know, the difficulties that can come with, you know, siting facilities, you know, at the edge of town, you know, town, instead of, you know, putting it in clear in the middle where it's clear that the benefit of the tower is to the residents in which the tower resides.
The level of coverage that is on the Southampton Tower, you know, just judging by the picture more than anything, it looks like it's missing one of the rings. You know, my eyes are good; I can't quite read all of it. You know, it shows, you know, the existing East Hampton Tower has 3 bands on it.
Yep,
But the Southampton one only has 2,
yep,
so it looks like it's missing one.
great question.
In making the improvement to the Southampton Tower, relieve or improve the existing service in East Hampton?
I can definitely speak to that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up these other maps to give you an idea of what that would potentially look at. So again, for your reference, this is the 2100 megahertz coverage layer. This is our underlay layer. In these earlier maps, you can see pretty clearly that our overlay layer, our 700 megahertz, exists at the Southampton site. The Southampton site is a little more rural. It hasn't shown a need for us to add our 2100 megahertz layer, and therefore that's exact. I mean, that's well done to see that that's what the individual little slices mean. You know, it means that you have that frequency there, and that's why East Hampton is filled in. So to your point, if we provided service, if we added this service to this tower, the antenna pointing in this direction would definitely provide enhanced 2100 megahertz services at that frequency only into the portion of the town of East Hampton, similar to the way the 700 megahertz provides today, you know, albeit unable to go as far as 700 megahertz, just due to the frequency challenges of it. If we made this investment, which we may very well do someday, just for today's purposes, we haven't made that investment, you know, it still would not in any way enhance the areas that were shown down in this map for, you know, not only 700 megahertz, but it would not provide anything substantial down in this area at the 2100 megahertz that I'm showing here. So,
Can you turn them a little bit?
it's a great question, but at the end of the day, that's a slippery slope. You turn them to benefit one person, you inherently take away service from someone else. And
I'm saying it quasi-jokingly.
yeah, no,
I'm thinking of the rabbit ears on the TV.
I mean, yes, you know, we do what we call optimization work, where sometimes we'll change the azimuths where we can, you know, to enhance service in an area that needs it. But you know, I think what we put together tonight really clearly shows that while we've, you know, made investments in and around the town, and we've added, you know, enhanced services to their sites within the town, we have a challenge in the southern portion of town that we really feel this proposed facility would resolve.
Okay, I have a question, I don't know if it's for Jamie or for you. If the ZBA approves this at the 120 feet, because of all the tree cover, that to me might preclude a co-location of other carriers, which is always a good thing because there are all the trees there. Would cutting the trees down, could Verizon go in there and cut the tree cover down to allow for co-location and thus making the pole more visible? Or is that something we should be concerned about?
Well, it does provide for co-location, so the next person coming in, but I don't know that we want to make it, if we don't have to make it more visible.
Oh,
without
no,
knowing it,
I'm just
wanna do
concerned that because if putting antennas on an existing monopole only requires site plan approval, if I read this correctly, so
No.
that sort of takes the subjective criteria out.
We need a special permit.
Once
You
it's
mean
built,
the next carrier?
the next carrier.
Yeah.
So maybe if this gets approved, can we put a condition on it that the tree cover can't be cut down so that the next carrier who wants to, because the trees are going to block a co-locator.
Well, another carrier can also extend the tower too.
Yeah, at that point, they would have to come back.
For
Right,
another
right,
special
right,
permit if they're
right,
going to put the
right.
tower taller.
Correct.
If I may, one thing you have to keep in mind is Verizon will only have control over their lease area, which is 100 by 100 feet. So the trees within that area to build a 50 by 50 foot compound, those would be removed. But, and Jay, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure even cutting those trees, you know, beyond a 100-foot zone around the tower would really do what I think you're suggesting, because it's more than just the trees right there. It's the trees in the whole general
Okay,
area.
all right. I just want to
But
make
your
sure
point,
that,
it's a good one. It's a good point that you're making. Co-locators may struggle at lower heights. Maybe not the next one down at 110, but maybe at 100, yeah, that might get marginalized. So you're
but it
absolutely
would take
right.
a lot more than cutting the trees on this one property. So that, I just want to protect the trees to protect the view shed.
Absolutely.
Sure.
No, and
Oh, I thought
that's
you
one
wanted
of
the trees
reasons-
cut.
one of the
No,
reasons-
just the opposite.
Oh,
I want
okay.
to not prove something that in the short term, because other carriers are want to come in and co-locate,
Yeah,
that they're
I've
wanting
never
to
heard
take
of
the
that
trees.
happening.
Yeah, I was gonna say that as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
that-
I've never
It's
heard of that.
usually-
We've heard of towers
They would-
expanding, we never
They would come
heard
in
of.
and want to try to extend it if they could prove the need to go to that height.
Okay, but that would require another public hearing,
Yes.
not just a site plan, which you lose all the discretion. Okay, I'm satisfied.
Okay, in that realm, if I could ask a question of the architect. When designing the footing and the base structure of this tower, what did you design it for? 120 feet or 150
Typically,
feet?
what happens is they're designed to be expanded. 20 feet, 30 feet. They're made to be co-located upon. And again, you know, the wind codes change. We don't like, it's very expensive, you know. It's
I understand well.
2 cents on the dollar if it's anything, to do any, you know, extra concrete now as opposed to coming back, you know, and doing any enhancements structurally. So typically what we've been doing is designing them to be extended.
And what have you designed this to be extended to?
It hasn't been purchased yet. So the typical extension would be a 30-foot extension.
A 30-foot extension?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the-
Which would be nothing that we would have do. They
No,
would have to be back.
and you've got your engineer,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
1.5 times ratio and all that other happy jazz that you put into it anyway.
But to your
Right, and-
point, it would be designed and constructed foundation-wise to be able to be extended actually at usually
Yeah.
20 feet. I guess 30 may be the new
Yeah,
standard.
well, the tower itself to be structurally adequate.
Right.
And that's common throughout the industry, not just, here in this
Oh, no,
region.
I'm-
Yeah, but, I mean,
We've all seen where you go buy one and 2 weeks later, 2 years later, instead of having one set of antennas, now it has 3 sets of antennas.
Right.
Well, and I guess one of the things too, as Jay pointed out, he's looking strictly at Verizon, where many of those other sites probably have different co-locators. Some may be even higher that wouldn't want to be necessarily higher than Verizon's. They kind of, if they're higher on the chimney stack, and I just use that as an example, they might be feeding down to this area with a better signal strength. So it's not like everyone's on the same plane.
Okay. Within the same property is an existing right-of-way for utility. Did you look at using one of those existing poles and extending it rather than building another pole within that same property?
So I'm going to speak to that, and then I'm going to ask you, Doug, to jump in as well. So that is not something we looked at, and I'll give you the reason for that. Those high-power transmission lines have some significant challenges with them. The greatest one being that should a wireless carrier co-locate on them, and you would co-locate on the top, once you're on them, your ability to service your equipment on those towers, those transmission poles, if you will, is greatly at the discretion of the power company, which I'm presuming in this case is Wamego Eversource. We as a general policy, don't co-locate on those types of structures because, if we have an outage, if we have an antenna that becomes defective or a radio that isn't working, instead of sending someone out there the same day to correct that issue and provide the level of service our customers need again, it could be weeks, it could be months. We had a facility that we co-located on in Connecticut, 20 years ago that when we were upgrading for our 4G service, it was about 15 months before the power company agreed to do a shutdown, and that really hinders our ability. 2 things. Number 1, providing better service for our customers, and number 2, maintaining the reliability level that we expect to provide our customers. Doesn't mean other carriers couldn't do that. They may choose to do that at their discretion. They may be willing to take on that risk. Verizon Wireless is very focused on reliability to our customers. That's why we go after facilities that we know we can maintain 24/7, 365. That's why we put emergency generators and batteries in our facilities so that should there be a loss of commercial power, our facilities continue to run. If we're all from the area, we know in the last year, 5 years, we've had a lot of different weather here. And one of Verizon's calling cards is, we stay on air to provide the service we need for our customers. Doug, I don't know if you have any other comments
The
on
only
that.
thing I say isn't Jay's exactly right in saying, basically, they only allow you to take a line down on the shoulder seasons, the spring and the fall, when the electric grid is at its lowest, because they really have to reroute all the electricity off for a different transmission to that area. And in some cases, there is no second route. They're enhancing that now. There's a lot of work going on those, but they will only take them down, and they're very, very much, you're at their beck and call. You have to pay them for doing work on the tower, and they'll give you, a day or 2 notice. You might have asked for it, I've had one that was, like Jay said, 15 months. It's not uncommon for them. Even when you're all set to go, equipment sitting there, they'll say, no, sorry, we can't take it off. Try again in 2 or 3 months. And you reapply.
What you indicated, backup generator, air conditioner, things like that. What is the noise level and going to be coming from this unit?
It's like an outdoor air conditioner when you hear it run, and it's tested once a week, and it's about a half an hour, and we can control the timing. And that is something typically that we would present when we're doing our special permit. We'd have a noise study done and make sure that it's compliant with the zoning regulations, the city's noise ordinance, and and levels that are comfortable. But given where this is located, I can't imagine anyone would hear anything from it.
Yeah, the air conditioning units are self-contained. They're 3.5 tons, so it's probably what one would have at their home, maybe even a little bigger at their home. We have 2 of them, but they're in a lead lag situation. Again, it's a belt and suspenders approach where one runs and the other one runs. There's no point in time would both really run unless they were defective. And as Ellen said, the generator, unless there's loss of power to the area, the generator is just exercised once a week.
And that's also internal.
Yes,
To the-
yeah.
to
In
the
this case, we have an
It's
interior
the shelter.
generator set, so it's very quiet.
With the tree covered here, I just don't think anyone would hear it. But we would present a report that would demonstrate that.
Okay. Does anybody else on the board have questions on this portion? Thoughts, concerns, questions?
I'd like to hear if there are any neighbor concerns, and that might prompt some other questions that we would
Okay.
have.
Okay. Neighborly concerns? Are there any questions from the neighbors?
Hannah. I do have a couple of questions.
Can you state your name and?
Jennifer Atwater, 48 Brook Street. And I apologize, I don't remember your name. Okay, Jenny. You had mentioned perceived demand on several different occasions. You speak as though there's not a current demand for this, but this is something that is going to need to happen for the future. Is that accurate, or is this a current demand, or?
No, great question. Let me make sure I clarify my comments. We have current demand,
Okay.
which requires the siting of a new facility in this area to enhance coverage and capacity. We also know by looking at our month-to-month analysis of our existing sites that wireless data usage trends upward every month.
Sure.
The one exception might be there's sites that are seasonal. Sites on the Cape, they're busy in the summer, and they're the sites in Vermont, the ski resorts are only busy in the winter, things like that. This being in just an urban suburban setting, the trending is it slopes up every month, and it's going to be relatively trend. It's a standard trend line. It's not going to have too many fluctuations from seasons or colleges or things like that.
Okay.
So that creates the current demand. The perceived demand that we talked about is really one of the reasons why the proposed facility not only includes our overlay coverage, but also includes our underlay coverage, because the best way I like to give an analogy to is the movie Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. What we find in a lot of times is as we build facilities, within a month or two of their usage, and people understand, whoa, my phone suddenly works great, their interest in their phone or tablet or whatever increases, significantly. And, quickly, if not properly planned for, we might, be dealing with that in a new facility where it's, quickly what we call exhausted. It's not currently providing the level of service we want to provide to our customers. So, how do we, to the best of our ability, shore up against that rather than wait to deploy our underlay service? We're going to deploy both of them at the same time to give it as much capacity as we have available to us now in terms of spectrum, in terms of frequency, to provide the best service we can for the day the tower goes on, and then, whether it's 6 months or a year down the line. And as we go month to month after the tower is turned on, we're trending. And if we determine there are additional needs, enhancements that require us to go back to the facility to add services, we do that through the normal application process, whether it means another special permit or site plan or just getting a building permit. I've worked with Verizon long enough to say in my 4.5 years, we've done 3 different enhancements over the years to add services to the East Hampton facility, and I've done 2 different enhancements to Southampton over the 4 years I've been here to add services and new antennas and things like that.
Right. My other question is, you have spoken earlier, Linda, when you asked your question about service in your home, you had spoken about watching videos and movies and things like that. And again, please, I have the limited knowledge of how the intricacies of technology works. But is that cell service that runs that video, or is that data? Is that cell tower at the end of Brook Street really going to help something that comes like streamed?
Okay, that's a great question.
Does that make sense?
So what I presented tonight, these different frequencies, that basically is your signal that allows you to connect to the service. When you're connected, whatever service you want to use is entirely up to you. So this tower is going to provide high-speed data service. So if you want to, stream YouTube, go on Instagram, check Facebook, send an email, you can do all of that.
Maybe explain the devices that it works on.
Right. Now, most of our customers, have what we call smartphones today. You have one.
Sure.
And those are our devices that are capable of using our high-speed data services. One of our new products that we're also offering on our 4G LTE network is our advanced calling feature, which is the same voice service that you've gotten used to over the years, but just much improved calling quality. I don't know if you've ever done like a call through Skype or a conference bridge with someone like that, and the sound quality is crystal clear. And this tower will provide that service, and all of our newest phones are providing that as well. So we would say that this, at a high level, it provides voice and data services on the 4G network. And then from there, what you want it to use is really up to you. And as we go month to month, year to year, new services are added to the towers as different things become of interest to our customers.
Okay, all right. And why is it in the white area where it's perceived you have coverage but only basic coverage? Why do other cell phone providers have good coverage in those areas?
So I'll make a couple of comments. So while Verizon does, as part of its baseline, we do test our competitors' networks to evaluate their service levels. We don't have an intimate knowledge of what our other service providers are doing. So, for example, to the point that the board made earlier, my knowledge recalls to me that on this Southampton facility, there's multiple other providers on there, and so that's pretty common. When there's existing structures, we tend to all co-locate on the same structure. That usually benefits everyone, so we don't have towers all over the place. I don't have an intimate knowledge to say that I know that another carrier provides better service than us in this area right now. What I can tell you is there are a couple of factors that might come into play. One might be that, as Mr. Roberts mentioned previously, that on the existing facilities in this area, they're co-locating higher. And so their line of sight to certain areas might be improved. They may, have their antennas oriented in a different way, and or have different antennas that provide service, a little bit stronger than us. We all invest in different technologies in different times. There might be a competitor that has, better voice but worse data, for example. There could be, although if they were, I'm not aware of one from my analysis of the FAA and FCC database. There's nothing in those databases that suggests that there's another pole type facility in town, other than the just across the way at the police and fire station. But there could be another facility that I'm not aware of, that a building or something like that in the southern portion of town that they're on. And lastly, part of what we also have to work on is not only bringing the network, but working with the device companies to make sure their phones are using the best radios in them as possible to provide services. So we have competition, and they're all skilled as well, and they work the best they can to provide services to their customers just as us. I'd say there are some things that we all do pretty similarly nowadays that we can just tell by going to a site and looking at the equipment. There's some things that we do differently, and different providers may be willing to try different things in the name of service over reliability. Different providers may have more installations because they only earn certain frequencies. For example, there are some providers that don't own a 700 megahertz license, and so consequently, in order to provide the same level of service they need more transmitter locations because their signal doesn't go as far. We try to be the best everywhere we can, but it's an open market. Customers have many choices, and for us to make sure that we're providing the best service we can, we've done a lot of analysis to know that this is an area where not only do we need a new facility, but we've also looked at our existing facilities and determined, just simply, turning an antenna or, getting to maybe a bigger antenna is not going to be, enough of an impact to resolve all of our short and long-term issues, or B, is necessarily the prudent way to go about something to fix a larger problem in an area.
And I'm not sure actually who this question is probably best answered for, but the property that we own at the end of Brook Street has the ability to be broken up into probably 2 or 3 additional building lots. And so down the road, our thought process was potentially to sell that property. So I'm curious now what anybody can share with me what that's going to do to our property value where there is a cell phone tower right now. Or proposed.
I'll give you my own thoughts on it. I will say to all, I am not a real estate consultant or expert. My only comment will be from my own experience. I purchased a home 1.5 years ago in Springfield, and even though I'm a wireless engineer, I was so excited about the home and the beautiful backyard, I never bothered to check the wireless service. And I don't have great wireless service in my own home, and it's a little embarrassing comment, but we're working on that. I would say, I can't really speak to your concern. Does a tower here, gonna reduce the value of your property? My personal experience in a world where people are more and more dependent on their phones is, I have plenty of people that I've spoken to that are in real estate or looking for houses that, one of the things they do when they go to check a house is, do I have service? They check their phones, or they go to the store ahead of time and say, I'm looking to buy a property here. Can you tell me who has good service here?
Well, this now, and again, I don't understand the technology behind it, but if this cell tower is immediately in front of these proposed new properties, that's not going to benefit them. Isn't it going to go right over top of their house? No different than a cell tower being on top of the mountain would go right over your situation.
When I show these maps, these maps are, and I will, clarify that it's a model. It's a tuned engineering model, but my experience over the years is that it's a very accurate model. And although those antennas are in the air, they have, they're not perfect antennas. So you don't think of it like, a beam of light and, coming out of those antennas and everything underneath them, has no service. They have, flaws in them that, allows for RF to point straight down and to the side, and they even have what they call a front to back ratio, which means, when you concentrate your energy in a position, how much of it goes directly behind the antenna. And these have, our antennas typically have like a 45 front to back, which is great, but it still means, when you turn on this site, if you're standing right here, for example, you might be on this sector, for example. And the idea is to buy the best antennas you can to put as much of your energy in the direction that you want it. So, my personal experience, I've gone to, dozens of different facilities over the years to evaluate exterior and, interior equipment. And I've always been able to get service on the, at the ground level. I'll give you an example. We built a facility in Northampton at Thorns Marketplace, which if you've ever been, there's no service inside for years, and we just built a facility. And, now we're in the basement where our equipment is located, 45, 50 feet down from where the antennas are, and we have service. And we checked it out today. So, to your point, I think if I understand your question, is the absolute best service going to be maybe 2/10 or 1/4 of a mile down, where you're more in the line of sight of the antenna? Yeah, that's true. But underneath, you're still going to have service. If you have homes within 500 feet, 600 feet, 700 feet, they're going to benefit from this facility.
Is there somebody else that could address the assessment value of the property more specifically?
Well, we have had real estate appraisals done in areas where we're putting towers, and there's been no effect of any reduction in value of properties as a result of having cell towers.
And what have those areas been? Like, have they been, because honestly, this is sort of
They've been
prime property that abuts a town park and a cul-de-sac and a nice neighborhood. There's town property, because the town owns the Brook Street well that's behind it. So for a resale perspective, it has high value just based on the fact that nobody's going to put up, a monstrous manufacturing facility in the park.
And they have been all different areas. We've been putting them up for the last 20 years in all different environments, and so we haven't had anywhere that it's had a negative effect on the property values.
Not at all. Not a penny.
Well, we haven't had to do them in every area, but where we have done them, where we've been concerned. Again, we try to stay away from residences, or we're in areas like this where we have the tree cover, where they're not necessarily going to be seeing it. So it hasn't been a problem.
All right.
So are you saying that no evaluation was done, or for?
Well, again, that's more that's something we would do for the special permit hearing, that we could get an appraisal, have a real estate appraisal done on the effects of having the tower there. It didn't really, that's where we would do it.
Right.
So.
And I guess my last question is, what's it going to look like? I've driven down the Jersey Turnpike and they look, like trees. Is that what the plan is, or is it?
It hasn't been we are not anticipating doing a tree design, what do we call a monopine. It's up to the board, the planning board, what they decide they want us to do. We can paint them, we can do.
What are the options for what it would look like?
A tree design for the standard monopole, but we could paint it. We've done that, brown or green or, well, we've seen two tones, we don't do that.
Right.
And I don't know if we could do maybe a photo sim of what a tree tower would look like.
Why would you put a tree if you can't see it?
And the other thing to keep in mind, and Mike, I'll ask you to chime in if you wouldn't mind, that one of the things that we look at when we're considering monopole versus monopine is the visibility above the tree line. In this case, we're not too far above the tree line. And one of the complications is, and I don't know if you've all ever seen this, if you're driving on the Mass Pike towards Boston at one of the stations, I don't know if it's Charlton or if it's Framingham, if you're going east, it's on your left-hand side, someone made a tree, and it looks like a
Charlie Brown.
Yeah, like a Charlie Brown kind of
Yeah, they
tree.
can go
So,
one or the other.
Sometimes they draw attention.
That's what I'm
But
kind of
we're
concerned
willing to
about.
work
And
with,
they-
Look like a green toilet
Right.
brush.
Yeah.
Right. You know what? I didn't want to say that word. And one thing is true is they necessitate. If you go with a monopine, and
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, they necessitate just to make them look right and slope properly,
Sure.
the structure increases in height.
Right.
And width, and one of the things we have here that
They're kind of heinous.
that we're working to our advantage is the fact that we've got a heavily wooded lot. And
Right.
we're gonna be very selective in terms of, you know, the trees that are gonna come down, so that direct lines of sight are going to be negligible. The property owner may have it from his backyard, but other than that, you know, from what I can see, this is so heavily wooded that you're just not gonna have those direct lines of sight.
Right.
So that's one of the
I
things.
told them to cut them all down, I burned one, and they said, no, they're only gonna cut one half. And it's
You're gonna
very-
go cold, Reggie.
Yeah, I need wood.
Okay.
I offer too that, you know, and again, you know, a monopine, as Jay pointed out, a monopine isn't just that monopole with branches on it. That all adds ice and wind load onto that because a tree just falls over. And we have to meet Massachusetts building code, so therefore, you know, that monopole becomes a chimney. And it becomes a lot larger, more visible than what a standard monopole might be.
So that isn't what we proposed,
In
actually.
an effort to make it look better, it looks bigger.
Yes.
Correct.
And to
Yeah.
really work.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're rarely requested to do that.
I mean, maybe color, but there again,
Yeah,
as you
you're-
said,
yeah.
that's a
Right,
planning board.
we can do that for you,
Yeah.
Well,
brown
and I know that there's
and that we've done, that
Yeah.
that we do.
there's a tower on Ferry Street that is on top of an existing water tower. And the city said you can put it there, but you have to make it look like it's part of the water tower. But if you look at it, it's a rusty water tower with a white band at the top. Well, that's what it is, that's where it is.
Right.
They just plopped it right on top of it, and it's got this shield, so it looks like it's part of the water tower, but that's what's really there.
Yeah.
So, any other questions?
I have a question.
Can you see your name for the record?
Hannah Miller. I live in this area, and in my area, I have seen red fox, black bear, deer, coyotes, bobcats, and many species of falcons, hawks, and vultures. How is this tower going to affect the wildlife in this area?
Mike, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah,
please?
we quite honestly, it's not. When you think about the footprint, first of all, on the ground of what we're building, it's really smaller than most residential homes. So,
Okay.
and we're not clearing yards and doing that type of thing. So what we find is, certainly during the construction phase, 6-8 weeks, if there are animals utilizing that area, maybe passing through or using the wetland down below, they're gonna probably keep their distance. But once these things are built, we find that they certainly don't impede movement or anything like that because we're not cutting a corridor off or anything like that. So we found that it really doesn't have any kind of a negative impact at all. We do find that we have several avian species that like to nest
Yeah.
on the towers, especially where you have water close by. Ospreys are notorious because these triangles that are holding on the antenna arrays make a wonderful spot for them to start dropping branches that will lodge and build those large nests. We've had common ravens, we've had all sorts of bird species that will utilize and nest and have fledglings and come back year after year. So my experience, having been involved in this for over 20 years, is that we've not seen any real impact at all negatively on wildlife.
The one thing I'll add to that is Verizon Wireless, as a federal license holder, has to follow what we call the NEPA process, or National Environmental Policy process. So part of our application and our internal due diligence is submitting a NEPA application to evaluate our proposal and ensure that our proposal meets all those requirements. So we're still in that process right now. There may be, for example, a determination that says due to nesting habits of a certain animal, we might not be able to construct in a certain time of year, for example, where like a mating season, things like that. Another thing that happens to us, and not too much here, very much so in Connecticut, but we have facilities, for example, like in Agawam, very close to the river, where when these osprey or other birds do nest on top of the tower, we have a consultant that will go up with a camera and identify whether or not and forgive me, I don't know the term, but more or less if the nest is active, if it has, fledglings, if it has eggs. At that point, that tower essentially becomes off limits for climbing and maintenance.
Right. It's under the Migratory Bird Act. Actually, almost all species are protected under that. So if there is an active nest, you can't disturb. It's considered a take in the federal language. So yeah, there are times where we're trying to get in, and out in a couple of days. But if a bird is up there and they're actively nesting, you have to wait till the birds fledge. So that's something we're very conscious of. And Verizon is the leader of all the carriers when it comes to that sensitivity. One other thing to your point that I want to make, there are some towers that do have high mortality rates for bird collisions. But what they found, the science behind this over the last 30 years or so, they found that it's typically towers that are in excess of 300 feet tall, typically guide towers, those ones that have the wires, because what happens at night when they're lit, and you have those three combinations, very tall towers have the guide wires, and you have lights, it will attract birds to the area, and as they fly around, they actually collide, not with the tower, but with the guide wires.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a very low tower, anything below 200 feet. It complies with, actually, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has guidelines on what they consider to be the gold standard on how you should construct these towers, and everything we're proposing here meets that standard. And just anecdotally, again, having visited sites that have been constructed for over 20 years, the only time I've seen any carcass of any animal was a rabid raccoon that had passed on, and I think the neighbor probably shot it because it had definitely been predated. But,
Hi, Richie.
but that was a great question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You just mentioned something about light. Will the building itself have any exterior lighting? Any sort of...
I can speak to that. Sure, it will. The building itself will have exterior lighting, but they're on timers.
Okay.
So that when a cell tech comes, and many times they'll do maintenance at night when call volumes are very, very low. So, you don't close the casino during the day. You do that kind of work at night. So most of the time what will happen is a cell tech will go to the site, they'll just turn the timer on. They're like 12-hour timers typically. And when he leaves, if he doesn't turn it off, it'll go off automatically.
But will there be a light that comes on every night?
No.
Okay.
No,
only when someone's there.
Only
And
if someone is there.
Getting back to
And it's just on the building, it's not on the tower.
it's not on the tower. Yeah, they would never do that.
They're typically down shielded as well, so we're really talking about it stays within the compound.
Yeah.
That's another thing that Verizon is taking the lead on a lot of their
A technician visits the site roughly once a month for just maintenance verification that the site is in working order. My experience has been in terms of night work, what we call in the maintenance window from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. Maybe once a year, sometimes twice a year, depending on if we're doing a lot of interior work that has a risk of the cell resetting. But once a year is pretty typical. The only other time would be if there was an outage, due to commercial power loss or something like that. But typically, our technicians work normal business hours. They'd be there during the day checking things.
You indicated that the power to the facility would be underground. Now, obviously, that's going to be from the end of Brook Street,
That is correct, yes.
tunneled out to there. What infrastructure improvements, modifications, whatever you want to call it, is going to happen from that location down Brook Street to wherever it needs to go? I'd assume it goes to the Verizon location downtown?
No, well,
Or where
you're
does it go? How does
two
it
things. The electric side, again, we'll be putting an electric service in. It will put a meter gang in, so that co-locators would be able to tap right off that existing meter center. Typically, we bring a 600 or 800 amp service in. That won't affect anything. I mean, we basically are putting 200 amp services, probably what most of us has in their house. So, it's not a huge electric load. Years ago, we brought in, T1s maybe, now it's all fiber. Everything's fiber. So, you are right, they'll bring in fiber, but there will be, we just have to work with the phone company, Verizon in this case, to bring fiber to the end of the street, but it won't be this huge pipe, if you will, in the
On the poles or anything
Yeah.
like that.
Now,
It's very,
the city has a 12-inch water line that runs right down the road to,
Mhm.
before you're gonna go into the town.
Yeah.
Well,
It's,
they'll find that with Dig
yeah.
Safe, and I'm sure they
Right.
know exactly where that is.
I don't know.
and again, like was pointed out, we'll do, dig safe, everything will be done
Okay.
prior to us doing anything like that.
Okay, I actually read all the variance information here, which is really why we're here. And it's true. I have one question, which isn't really related to the variance. Truthfully, I don't have a problem with this pole or this location, and I understand why you need, for the variance. Are you actually, several times it's mentioned in here, and you're required by the FCC under Verizon Wireless license, basically to provide service. So basically, you're saying that you have a license from the FCC, and they say you have to provide service in this location?
Well, they-
Or you just have to provide service in general?
Right, we have to provide service in general, which means we can't have big gaps in coverage. So we spend a lot of time, and a long time, finding sites so that we can, meet the needs of and satisfy our license. So, and Jay, if you want.
Yeah, I can
Talk
speak
about
to
the
that
license.
as well. It's a great question, and forgive me, I don't have all the particulars, I'll just try to explain it at a little higher level. When Verizon or another carrier wins a bid with the FCC to get spectrum, you now own this 700 megahertz upper C-band license. With it comes two things. First of all is, big check that's written to the federal government. But it comes with some conditions, as Ellen mentioned. And what they are is what they call build-out timelines. And what that basically means is you get the spectrum, and then, over a period of years, depending on the license, it's one of two particular factors. Either with this license over, let's say, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you have to provide, a reasonable level of coverage to, a percentage in that area of the square mileage, 50%, 75%, 98%, or cover a number of, a certain number of populations, and they would be based off, the last U.S. census. So that is really where the crux of that comes from, that comment is that when we purchase something, you can't just sit on it for the purposes of maybe keeping that spectrum from your competitors, for example. You have to build it out. And so part of that process for building out new locations requires us to either A, identify areas where we don't have service that would meet that license, due to we're not covering enough square mileage in this license, or B, find areas where we can enhance the total number of people covered to meet the license in that way. So that's really kind of where our obligation comes from. Not only from a just a business standpoint, we want to provide good service to our customers, but from a license holder standpoint, you've got to meet these guidelines to providing service. And most of that is done through the upgrades of the existing facilities, and then it's supplemented by, as the needs of the network increase year over year, by the development of new facilities.
And the 911 coverage too that we're.
That's another piece of it. Hopefully no one's ever had to do this, but we have what we call E911 requirements, and what basically that means is 911 service, to Northampton Barracks. There's a local, police station. Reliability from, the federal government as well. And what it basically says is we are a phase 2 provider, which basically means that, when someone, if they have to, has to make a 911 phone call, and I don't know the numbers exactly, but it's roughly saying for phase 2, 95% of the time when someone calls 911 from a wireless phone, you need to provide the dispatcher your location, your GPS signal, within 150 meters of your exact location, 450 feet. And then roughly 67% of the time, you need to provide that level of accuracy within 50 meters or 150 feet. The idea being that if you're someone lost in the woods or someone that needs help because you're being attacked, or something like that, even if you're not able to say something, the dispatcher has an idea within a 0.08 square mile, radius of where you are. So, one of the ways that we work to make sure that we can meet those requirements for E911 service is to, make sure in as many places as possible we have what we again call reliable service.
All right. Fran, do you have further questions?
I don't have any questions, no. I'm good.
Okay. All right.
I have a question for you, John. Is the additional information that you requested important for you in making a decision? Because as I said, based on the variance request information that they provided and the presentation tonight, I would make a motion to approve the 3 requested variances without going beyond tonight's meeting, but I know you asked for additional information, and so I would just...
If it's a condition, can be a condition, we'd be happy to provide it.
I guess the one thing that we all have to take into consideration is that none of us are in the cell phone business. As far as I know.
No, definitely not.
Okay. And no different than, you have an expertise that you can talk to people about, and I have an expertise that I can talk to people about, and Fran, and so on. We've been given information, and we can take it at face value, and we can say that this information is the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Or we have the right, under the articles of our zoning ordinance, to get a peer review, consultation, whatever we want to call it, of the information.
And I agree, but at this point, based on the variances, I think that peer review might be more appropriate if it's necessary for the planning board, not for us, because we're only dealing with variances.
This allows us to go forward with a special permit at this location. That's all this is doing, is saying, okay, we can place it here where it's within a mile and it's within the slope and it's outside the district. And that's all that's what we're asking for. And I understand that, and we do that all the time.
Right. I don't think that we have the authority to say whether it's necessary or not, which I think is kind of what you're asking.
But if we're granting a variance for use, which is a whole nother ball of wax there, because of state mandates on use variance and everything like that, but we're okaying this location, basically.
You're saying we can go forward?
No, we're not okaying that location. All we're saying is that they have a right to apply for a special permit at that location. Then it's up to the planning board to decide if a tower at that location meets all the special permit criteria. And there are quite a few special permit criteria. And to me, that's 2 separate things. To me, the peer review belongs with the planning board. It's because any information we would get from a peer review would not relate to the variance. And I'm assuming the planning board will want a peer review anyway, and I don't know what we'd get out of a peer review that would help us make a decision on the variances. That's my opinion. And I understand.
Well, the peer review is going to review, the engineering data that says this is the best place for this tower. And and, you know, the thought being that if they come back and say, look, you know, this information isn't really what they're saying it is.
Well, I have an opinion on that. In my former life, when I worked as a planner in the state of Connecticut, before the Connecticut Siting Council luckily took over tower locations because we hated it, I don't think we ever got a peer review that disputed the location, because they don't spend all this money to find a location that's not going to work.
I mean, who are you even gonna get a peer review from? I mean, who would do that?
A consultant who also consults for
Yeah.
telecommunications companies, because that's the only way they can make money.
Right.
I just don't think, I mean, that's the
I don't think
case.
it belongs to us, is what you're saying.
Right.
It
In,
belongs to
the
planning.
variance belongs to us.
Right.
It's a variance. Now,
And my experience with peer reviews on this, and it was many years ago, because luckily they took that away from municipalities in Connecticut and gave it to the Siting Council, you never got anything worth spending the city's money on the peer review.
well, and we wouldn't be sending this, we would not be
Well,
spending
we'd be
it,
paying for
but
it.
Yeah, I know,
they'd be
but
paying
still,
for it.
but somebody paying for it.
You know, they're paying for somebody to tell us that what they said was true.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I've dealt with this enough that I have no reason to disbelieve.
Okay.
But that's just my opinion. I would just as soon vote tonight and let the planning board deal with all those other issues, because I think it's their jurisdiction, not ours. Ours is just the variance.
You can make a motion.
Well, before we go there, because I do have one other thing that is, and this is just an internal thing within us, is that the city has an ordinance that says that the overlay district is a certain location. They are asking for a variance to put the tower outside of that. We also have in that same ordinance that you can't have a tower within 1 mile of another tower. And in what I heard this evening, maybe it's just the way I've understood it, is that closer towers and lower closer towers is the future. And I'm getting a lot of head nods here, saying yes.
It's now and the future.
And now in the future. And are we opening Pandora's box to the city that basically if we accept this variance or issue a variance for this location, now if Bob Cellular comes in and says, hey, I want to put a tower and I'm going to put it at the end of, where Pomeroy and Hendrick or Pomeroy and Strong Street intersect, or a mile away, are we have set precedent that says that we said yes once, we have to keep saying yes.
No.
Individual, each
And
application
also,
is individual.
I think we found that our zoning regulations, almost every section needs to be rewritten.
That's a whole nother story.
Right, but that's, I think, what the problem is. I don't think it's with that issue, I think it's with this issue. That as they pointed out, the map came from almost 20 years ago, when I remember my first flip phone. No, it wasn't even a flip phone, it was this big
A
thing
bag
like...
phone, yeah.
And things have changed, and I think the problem is within our zoning regulations. I don't think in today's technology you can have a cellular district. I don't know I was a planner 20 years ago, and I never heard of a town that I dealt with that had a cellular tower district. So I think that's the problem. I don't know who came up with it, but I think it was outmoded by the time it was put on the books.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what it has. So I don't think it's going to open up. I think we've got to amend our zoning regulations.
Okay. That said, and I will agree to that. Are we, because of state statute that says we can't issue use variance, am I correct in that statement?
It's a local.
The local thing, that we can't issue a use variance. And Verizon is basically bound by the contract they have with the FCC to provide service to the most level, are we better to say that not that we're going to disapprove the variances or not accept the variances, but that the federal law supersedes our local zoning, and thereby we feel that, not that our hands are held, but that is they are then holding they have the right.
But we still have to make a decision at the local level.
Mhm.
Even though the federal government says you have to allow cell towers. The cell tower companies have to try to get through the municipal regulation.
and I don't
And then
wanna-
if it goes to court, then we would lose in court, not on this, but in general, if a town keeps denying all cell towers and Verizon takes them to court, that town is going to lose because of the federal government saying you have to allow cell service.
You were nice enough to provide all of that data that says yes, the town will lose. Okay, and the last thing I want is the city to be in litigation with Verizon because it won't end well.
But I think you can say as supported by the Telecommunications Act, which we've seen in decisions before.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, do we approve the variance with respect to the Communications Act? That Verizon has to provide service. It's a kind of a verbiage thing, for lack of a better term. Do you understand where I'm saying there, Jamie? Am I getting my point across correct? That not that I don't want to vote for it, but I don't want to approve the variance because it's a variance. I want to approve them moving forward because they have to.
Well, and I think part of the problem why they need these variances is our zoning regulations. I think that the 5% issue, I'm reading it, and I'm glad he explained why it was there, because I was reading it, and I'm going, what does this have to do with anything?
And I did call to ask why it was there, because we didn't know. We said, what's the purpose of that?
They didn't want another tower on top of the mountain.
Yeah.
On the East Hampton side of the
That's
line.
that's what I'm guessing.
I have to believe that that's the thought.
They have no structural reason, there's absolutely nothing.
People build on cliffs all the time.
And I'm assuming the only thing I can come up with the Tower District, the map, is that when my sister had a car phone, before they were cell phones, they were car phones. So you only use them along highways, and Route 10 was a quote-unquote highway. You would have a district along 91, and you would have a district along Route 10, because the only piece of people who had cell towers, who had cell phones, were traveling, were people who had money, who could afford to put a phone in their car.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're required to have cell service over the whole town. And this just was never updated, because East Hampton was lucky enough that we had the smokestack and the water tank and the other places, and now everyone's realized that this original map, which came out 18 or 20 years ago, before.
The technology was a third of what it
And
is
so I think the problem, even though all this criteria has to do with the land, it has to do with our regulation. That's my opinion, and that's why I don't think getting a peer review is going to do anybody any good. Waste Verizon's money and their time. I have Verizon service. I'd like it to upgrade it, even though I don't have a problem with what I have now. See, I think it's the regulation. And we're required to allow service because of the telecommunications. To provide, access because of the Telecommunications Act. But I think the reason they need the variance is not that they need that location, but they need the variances because of our book. The other issues, to me, go to the planning board.
Yeah. So, John, what you're saying, if Linda makes a motion to approve, and then you'll have to write it up, you'd like to put in there that we approved it I don't know exactly how to say it, but
Not under duress,
we
but.
we have to anyhow.
Yeah.
Because of the telecommunications.
Yeah, that's fine, I'll put that in a
You
motion.
can, you can write that in there.
Okay.
I just to me, I don't see a purpose of coming to another meeting and having a peer review of something that isn't related to the
Yeah,
variances.
and I think like if somebody on the outside reading it would say, well, they're gonna look at it and say, well, why did they approve this? And then they said, oh, well, okay, they had to approve it, so that's probably, I mean, it's not gonna hurt anything, you know.
Right. No. So,
Okay, I make a motion. I make a motion to close the public hearing?
okay.
Second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Public hearing is closed.
Okay, I make a motion.
Well, is there any
Oh,
other,
discussion.
discussion within the ranks here?
I'm in agreement with what you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement going forward. Why waste any time?
Okay. Are we, and I'm playing devil's advocate,
Mm.
okay? Because I live next door, and if I'm not jumping up and down, then, and I haven't recused myself, then, it's okay. But my question is, are we, in essence, allowing for, I don't want to say a tower every mile, but basically, they're going to get out their compasses and they're going to go, okay, here's a tower, and here's a tower, and here's a tower, and I've got a 1 mile radius around all of them.
Well,
And now I can put another one here, because I can squeeze it in here, and I can squeeze another one here, and next thing you know, we're going to have towers all over town.
No, I think that's what people used to think, and I think because of co-location, I think this tower will get taller. Because other carriers want to go on that location, because they don't have the exact technology, I'm sure, but they have similar. And if you look at any of the other sites around here, they're all co-locations. There's not a tower with only one carrier on it. They all have AT&T and Verizon and Sprint and whatever else is out there.
Yeah.
And
And you know what? There's probably an application in another town that AT&T is doing, and Verizon's going to co-locate on it.
And
You guys are all taking turns at the well.
tower is a very expensive proposition to
Right.
build. And look how many consultants are in this room. And it's very expensive and time consuming. So they put a lot of time and effort into finding the location. And that's why we're not going to have a bunch of towers, because nobody else wants to spend the money to build it if they can co-locate on this one. So I personally don't believe there are going to be a lot more towers because of co-location and the cost of the towers. That's just my opinion, based on past experience. But I think it might be in East Hampton's interest to update our regulations as it dealt with.
That is a huge undertaking. We've had that discussion for a couple
Yes.
of years now,
Yeah.
haven't we? Okay.
Okay.
Linda, before you make a motion, can you just go through the findings and discuss conditions if there are any?
So as the motion is made, you want to make sure that everything is addressed so you can
Just
document
to step through what the findings would be and then,
Well, I was basically going to go along with the applicant's findings because they addressed each of the criteria, and I'll read them. The variance must be with respect to a particular parcel of land or to an existing building on the land. The variance relates to 51 Brook Street, a separate and unique parcel. B, there must be circumstances related to the soil condition, shape, or topography especially affecting such land or structure, but not affecting generally the zoning district in which it is located. I don't really want to sit here and read all of these, Janie, but you can put them in the minutes. This is about 5 pages.
I just want to make sure that whatever discussion and decision
Right.
that occurs, that's based on the discussion and that things were actually entered into the.
Yes, I would
they
like,
discussed it.
right,
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's go through, we can read, in passing the variance, we have to address the
Right.
4 topics. So as we address them, we will then have them what we've discussed. And,
Okay.
and not necessarily verbatim what is written in the proposal, but what our thoughts are
Okay.
That's what the board found.
and what the board
And how it
found.
supports the
So,
variance.
well, would you like to do that part then, John?
sure, I will
Okay.
do that part. Okay, so the first variance that is being requested is a variance to permit the erection of a telecommunications tower at 51 Brook Street, a site outside the wireless communication service district. Okay, and, A, is a particular piece of land? Yes. B, there must be a circumstance related to the soil condition, shape, topography, especially affecting such land or structure, but not affecting generally the zoning district in which it is located. And the applicant has indicated that, the site is, the other sites that would be within the use area, or even outside, being up on top of the mountain, would then, there'd be issue with service, and that it needs to be here to be able to use the existing towers that are in their infrastructure. Okay? Literal enforcement of the ordinance would involve substantial hardship, financial or otherwise, to the applicant. They have a license from the FCC to provide service. They have purchased this license. They must thereby provide service. Any additional thoughts, comments? As I go through these, please speak up. And D, desirable relief may be granted if there will not be substantial detriment to the public good or nullification or substantial derogation from the intent purpose of this ordinance. Well, as you've discussed, the ordinance was, created in 1998, long before we all walked around with, more technology than put man on the moon in our pockets. So we, the area is, away from most residences. From the presentation that was shown, the visibility from around town is minimal. And that, are there any other thoughts?
Tree coverage is good.
Tree coverage is good. So the visibility of the structure is not going to be great. Okay. So, on variance number 1, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes 5-0. If I could just back up 1 minute there, Jamie?
Mhm.
And I know that we just voted on this, but I want to make sure that we do also stipulate that the Federal Communications Act also deems, along with the FCC, that this must be passed. Is that
As one of the findings?
as one of the findings? Okay. Do I need a second vote on that?
I'll second it.
Okay. Well,
An amended vote?
Amended to that, just so it's in the public record.
Yeah.
Okay. So, second, all in favor?
Okay.
Try to fit that in somewhere.
Last.
Hope we all proof the minutes for next month.
I'm gonna be doing that on my phone. Use up all my data. Let me know when you're ready, Jamie.
1 second.
Yep. Okay. Motion number two, or I guess, motion number two. Variance to permit the erection of a telecommunications tower closer than 1 mile from another tower. Okay. Obviously, still related to the same lot, still related to the same circumstance of soil topography and land structure. That's A and that's B. C, literal enforcement of the ordinance would involve substantial hardship and financial otherwise to the applicant. The towers that are in concern are on top of the mountain. Testimony today indicated that use of those towers would not provide the same level of service. And anything else on that little part there?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Can you, I'm sorry, can you just restate the circumstances were for this soil condition, slope, or topology? You just said the same, but.
No, we haven't gotten to that one yet. This is number 2.
Right. The second, B.
B? Oh. The subject to the site is unique in elevation. Well, it has more to do with the elevation, that it is at the 200 foot above sea level, as opposed to the 1,200 foot above sea level at the top of the mountain. So that being the next, that tower being a mile away, it has to be closer because it's the severe slope of the mountain. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of.
No,
You
got it.
Okay. All right. And I got C. Did I cover C? Yes. What's that?
Repeat it, please.
Great, play the tape back. It's going to be easier.
Well, basically the same thing.
Yeah, that basically that they can't use the tower on top of the mountain because of the testimony. The testimony is that the tower on top of the mountain cannot have an antenna placed on it to direct coverage to the valley 1,000 feet below. Okay, and D, desired relief may be granted if there will not be substantial detriment to the public good or nullification or substantial derogation from the intent purpose of this ordinance. That they are the Federal Communications Act requires, or is that what? Yeah, Federal Telecommunications Act requires that they provide service, and that the tower that is less than a mile away, because of the elevation change, will not suffice. Okay. Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? Motion carries 5-0. Variance number 3. The variance to permit the erection of a telecommunications tower within 150 feet of an area with a slope in excess of 5%. Here again, A, with respect to a particular piece of property, is. B, there must be circumstance related to soil condition, shape, or topography. Topography it is. Especially affecting such land or structure, but not affecting generally the zoning district where it is located. Well, there is, they're looking to put a tower within 61 feet as opposed to the 150 feet that is required to a 5% zone grade change. And there's no, the architect has given no indication as to any challenges that this will create in the design of the structure. C. Literal enforcement of the ordinance would involve substantial hardship, financial or otherwise, to the applicant. The applicant has been issued a license by the FCC and is required to provide service per the Federal Telecommunications Act. D. Desirable relief may be granted if there will be not be substantial detriment to the public good or nullification of substantial derogation from the intent and purpose of this ordinance. The board could find no reason for the 35% or the 5% grade change other than the thought that they didn't want towers on top of them when the ordinance was passed. Second on the motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
We'll see you at the planning board.
Yeah. This is helpful, we'll be able to address any of those questions and information that you want.
Ellen,
Yeah.
John and I will make sure that the decision is written as
Yeah.
public hearing, and then it'll be sent to you. There's a 20-day appeal period.
Yeah. You understand all
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Okay.
Yes, very much so. So, thank you very much. So,
I hope I get improved service, even though I have bad service now.
yeah, all this will be addressed again, so it'll be repeat. But it's helpful to get all the issues out, so we know what issues to repeat, so.
I'm shocked that there are not more neighbors here. Obviously, everyone realizes it's back in the woods, and you've got those
Well,
big utility poles.
We'll do a publicized hearing quote, before the planning board hearing. We'll put it in the paper and mail notices so people can, know what's, we're gonna do it. So, yeah, thank you. My son's going to school, graduate school to be a planner. So I always ask about the work and stuff.
But I was thrilled that when the Connecticut Siting Council took these stupid
Well,
things
everybody here
away
goes
from the
through it.
planning board.
Where were you the
Wallingford,
Oh, okay.
28 years.
Wow. I wish you were back there. They're a tough bunch now down there.
I
They
retired.
still do building attachments. That's the one thing that's still in the jurisdiction of the towns. So.
I live in North Haven.
Oh, really? No,
You got a ride in front of you.
Many times.
Yeah, it won't be the first time.
I like this side of the table.
It's helpful to us actually too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time, really appreciate it.
Do we have anything else on our agenda?
The only thing we have on our agenda, let's wait till the room clears and settles.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Does anyone know this water house, this briefcase?
When somebody takes it, I have to call the bounce.
Yeah, right.
Good point.
That's all we need. Okay. The only thing we have left are these two transmittal letters for the application at 1 through 3 Lovefield.
Are these new now? I mean, I know they're presenting to us for the first time, but
They just want to know if you have any comments.
Yeah, do we have any comments?
The only comment I would have on the bill is I support it, and it shows the result of the town's investment.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me, I will look through them and use our best interest in mind in looking at them.
Yeah.
Okay. And, hold on, somewhere here I had an itinerary of what we were really supposed to talk about.
oh, it's right here. Do you want that?
Yeah, that would work. And the next ZBA meeting will be on Thursday, June 11th at 6:30. This location. Okay, motion for adjournment?
I make a motion to
adjourn. I second it.
All right.
I'm out of here.
I'm out of here. All in favor? All right. That's all, folks.